I'm not sure that I think the Senate Judiciary Committee is equipped to investigate sexual assault in the way that something that happened 36 years ago. I mean, you kind of need professionals on this. But
it's also not a criminal investigation, so let's make it.
Well, we don't know. We don't know any of this, right?
But what they're doing next Monday is not a criminal investigation.
That's right. The hearing in Congress is not, at the Senate, is not a criminal investigation. So tell me how you see this going down.
Well, look, I do think that there needs to be investigation done before these witnesses are put under oath to testify. And here's why. We don't take testimony in a vacuum. We evaluate this. This is going to come down to some extent to the credibility of each witness. But I'll come back to that in a moment. I think there are some external factors here that show that she is telling the truth. But when they are under oath testifying, you don't look at it in a vacuum. You need to be able to compare it to things that they have said in the past, how consistent their statements are over time, and what other corroborating evidence is there outside of their statements, and how do their statements fit in with that. That's how investigations are done. Whether they're criminal or not, the fact that this isn't criminal means it's not going to be a reasonable doubt standard. It's going to be a lower standard. But at the end of the day, it is going to be up to the senators and, frankly, the American public to decide who is telling the truth. But that can be done by not in a vacuum. That needs to be done by comparing what they've said over time and what the other corroborating evidence is. And if I can just explain what I think some of that corroborating evidence is already for Dr. Blasey. It is, first of all, she did tell her therapist back in 2012 about this. And for people to assume that she's lying now, that would mean that back in 2012, before Judge Kavanaugh was even nominated to the Supreme Court, she somehow planted the seeds of the story for some unknown reason. So that in and of itself, I think, is very good corroboration. She has already passed a lie detector test, which isn't dispositive, but again, I think it supports her. And another point that I don't think people have made enough is if she were making this up, which seems, or even confused, which seems to be, what some Republicans and others are saying, why would she put Mark Judge at the scene of this incident? Why, if she were making up a story, would she put someone who is Brett Kavanaugh's friend still to this day there to contradict her? It just doesn't make any sense.
If she had Democratic operatives orchestrating all of this, they
Mark
certainly
Judge wouldn't have been in the room.
Tell her to do that.
Exactly.
Mimi, help us understand really the importance of the way Brett Kavanaugh is handling this. Because while she may be telling the truth, and while there might not be a pattern, maybe this thing happened and he didn't do anything like it for the next 30 years, the way he's handled this, doesn't that carry a huge amount of weight? Because the job, and I call it a job, he's up for is the highest court appointment in the land, where his thought process, his decision-making, his judgment is specifically going to weigh in on the most culturally important issues that we face.
Right, Steph. I mean, this is the question of some people saying, well, even if it's true, does it really matter? It was so long ago. He was a teenager. Of course it matters. And here's why. First of all, he was not 13. He was 17. We hold people accountable for acts at age 17 all over this country. There are people in jail because of things they did when they were 17. So to say that, that is the age of adulthood, is the age of consent in many different states. I'm being very general here now because I think that's actually more useful than talking specifically about Maryland, because we're not talking about a criminal case right now. We're talking about how we as a society approach that age. So I think it is absolutely appropriate to hold him accountable for that. And this is not, throwing eggs at a house on Halloween. This is sexual assault where a woman felt she was going to die. Yes, I'm doing the if true argument now. This is not, if that is proven, to some degree to be true, then he should not be in a position to be making decisions about women and their bodies and children and other, important decisions in our society. And also, I would say that if we find that this was true, and again, I do believe her, but I understand that there are still many undecided, then that means he's lying about it. And even if you put everything else aside, the fact that he would lie about it now or is irresponsible enough to, just claim lack of memory, that would be disqualifying in and of itself, I think.
Garrett, let's go back to Anita Hill's comment in her op-ed about there being no protocol for vetting assault and harassment claims. Because all the stuff that Mimi's just said is fascinating to me. But as we know, in Congress, these hearings tend to be so highly politicized where people are trying to make their own points. We're just putting up this screen that you're looking at right now is lawmakers, all of whom have lost their jobs on Capitol Hill over misconduct scandals. At least 8 members have been pushed out because of these scandals. What's the process in Capitol Hill for a lawmaker? They don't have the Senate Ethics Committee.
What Al Franken was accused of doing is less than what we're talking about here.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.